Good evening, fellow Plexers. This video is for Phil. Phil has multiple movie libraries that he wants to combine to create one big movie library. And I thought I'd use my older Synology NAS, which is really just my backup repository for my newer Plex media on the newer Synology NAS, as my demonstration medium. So I'm on Elementary OS 8 that I'm testing out. I booted into that on my desktop computer, and I have the file manager open, and I want to enter that Synology NAS. Now this is where all my backup media is going from the main NAS. Small folder for some computer backups. These are the Docker containers I'm running on this NAS. Just Plex and Portainer. And then this is my shared media folder for my test Plex server here. And then I can also stop the Docker instance of Plex and spin up a Synology container instance of Plex, and that's where those application files are. So let's go into the media folder. Now, just like all my videos show, I use a nested folder structure. And I always use an example that's compliant with a trash guide setup in order to achieve those fabulously instant atomic moves. So many people, especially people using Unraid, don't gain atomic moves. And all I can say, this is going off the subject, on my Synology NAS, that's not a beast, it's not a rocket ship. It's powered, well, this one's powered by a 6th gen Celeron processor. My newer one's powered by a 9th gen Celeron processor. I have all the trash guide services running on that newer NAS, and it's running on 16 terabyte rusty Iron Wolf Pro drives in a RAID, basically a special RAID 5 configuration called SHR under the Synology ecosystem. Those rusty drives outperform some people's setup with Unraid using cache pool drives to speed things up, simply because atomic moves are enabled. I can't stress this strong enough, because the original files will land in a folder already in my shared media folder. When a application like Radar or Sonar or LiDAR takes that landed media folder and renames it and moves it into one of these library folders, that movement is instantaneous. And those R programs kind of run one acquisition after another. It comes in, it gets moved, then the next one comes in, it gets moved, the next one, so on. If I set this all up where, let's say there was another shared media folder that was simply labeled acquisitions, and that's where the incoming files landed, and then instead of a media folder for everything, I had a movie folder for Plex movies, and a TV and a music shared media folder for that type of media. They're disconnected. Any transfer of a file from one to the other is basically copied across the network, and once that file is copied, then it's deleted in its original location. That's like watching paint dry to see large files move across your network from one shared folder to another on an Unraid server or a Synology NAS or a QNAP NAS. So this nested folder structure I always stress because it's so good for future things like a trash guide setup. All right, so enough with that. So I'm into my shared media folder. I've explained why the acquisition folder for a trash guide setup is here. And now I use sort folders for each type of Plex library. A sort folder for movies, music, other videos, photos, and TV shows. Now this is just something I'm testing. I created a huge Windows 11 Plex server, and then I shut it down the right way, and I moved it to this NAS because now I have to figure out in a way that's able to be reproduced for someone to install Ubuntu and access a Synology NAS, because then I'm going to I'm going to show moving that Plex install from Windows to Ubuntu as a regular plain Jane bare metal Linux install. So that's a future video coming up when I have time. And now I have the TV library sort folder. So inside this, I can have separate libraries point to a main TV show library folder, a kids TV show library folder. I can have a separate folder for DVRing episodes if you want to keep commercial content or content with commercials separate, and even an anime folder. So there's a couple anime shows in here. I've got the Looney Tunes in here. The Looney Tunes is all public domain. And then I have 3 TV shows with public domain episodes in the main movie library. And then it's the same thing with the movie sort folder. This was a test. It's not really a library folder. Some test naming conventions. But here's a 4K Plex library folder. Here's a movie documentary library folder. And if you go inside it, it's just conventional naming for a movie and the actual movie in the movie folder. And then if I go into the kids one, here's some old Looney Tune cartoons named as movie shorts, which is what they actually are. And then in the main folder, here's just different libraries. So even with a small server, I think this nested setup is the best thing to start with, because it allows you to do anything you want down the road as your content expands, as your collection grows. So Phil, now may be the time to get this in order to make things easier in the future. All right, so now I can bring this test Plex server in. So I'm on that older server for the Synology NAS, and I've clicked down here at Manage Libraries to show me my installed libraries. So this is Steve's goal. He wants to just have one main movie library that includes all the movie content he has, even though they're in separate libraries. Well, it's as easy as getting rid of the ones you don't want from this area. Click here, click delete. They'll be gone. And then it's as easy as going to your main movie library and editing it and adding that additional path. So here's the path we just talked about. This MyPlex Media is simply the container alias for the physical structure, which is media, movie libraries, movie main. So this is just an alias, this MyPlex Media, which actually corresponds with a shared folder named media. I don't want to remove this, but I do want to add the kids library folder. So I click into the alias, then I click into the sort folder that I'm using, and then I click Movie Kids. If I wanted to add my documentary movies to this, it's the same process. The alias, because it's a container, the sort folder I recommend, and then I'll add the documentary. There's only one movie. Now we'll do the same thing for the 4K library folder. Get into the sort folder, add the 4K, and now there's an alternate, and I'll show that. I could just go in here and then just click on that to add. So this is just adding anything within that sort folder. But I don't like that, because if you want to rearrange things later, you can't just remove one of these. Say you get down the road and you have enough kid movie content that you don't want it in your main movie library. Well, if you've added everything just through this one path, you have to remove this to then add back in the main movie path, the documentary movie path, the 4K path, and then not add the kids and point a separate movie library at that. So it may seem easier to point ahead of everything, but really that can cause problems down the road. Point to the actual separated paths, and I do believe you should sort your content this way, because it may not matter. When you've got 200 movies total through all this, it makes sense to keep them in one library. But say 5 years from now, you're pushing 6,000 or 7,000 movies in the one library, and you could create separate ones because maybe you've got 600 kids movies. Maybe you've got 1,000 documentary movies. Maybe you have 150 4K movies. Well, once things get to that size, the smaller number, 150 4K movies, suddenly become a needle in a haystack to manually browse in a 6,000 or 7,000 title main movie library. So this nested folder structure is great for starting out, but it's also great to use in different ways once your library structure grows, or once your library grows overall to a lot of titles. So I'm going to save the changes, and you'll see this movie library that had just pointed to a specific folder now include things from those other sort folders. And I think altogether there's going to be 30 or 35 titles between all the libraries. Maybe not. Maybe I didn't add everything in. But we went from a small number of movies to now a larger one. So what do we have? We have the content from the kids library folder, and there's a documentary here. We've added that in. So down the road again, we'll edit this. If you want to break things out into their own libraries, I can go back here and I can leave the main movie, and I can get rid of this 4K path because now I'm going to have a separate 4K library, and I've got enough documentaries to have them in a separate library, so I can nuke that. And I'm creating a kids movie library, so I don't want those titles in my main movie path. And now I save changes, and those extra paths disappear. And we've come full circle, because even though I didn't want this originally, now I've gone back and created the kids, well, the TV. Let's do the kids movie library. Now I've gone back and created that separate movie library that only points to the one folder. So it really makes sense to create this nested structure, the one shared media folder or the one media folder on local storage, and then break it up into the 5 different types of Plex media. Now this is my test NAS, and I name things specifically so they make sense. Movie-libraries, that sticks in your mind as being a sort folder for movie libraries. I didn't do that with my personal media, and this will be confusing to some, especially if you had a Synology NAS for a while. The original DSM-6 package install of Plex went into a folder named Plex with a capital P. DSM-7 uses Plex Media Server, and they rearranged things. Well, I was already on DSM-7 when I rearranged things on the new NAS, and I simply named my shared media folder Plex. And then I use simple sort folder names: movie, music, photo. This is my landing zone for my Usenet trash guide setup. This is just a test folder, my TV sort folder, and my video sort folder. So if I go into the TV sort folder, I again have a subfolder in that called TV, which is where my regular TV show library is. I have a kids one, where all the kids cartoons are. And I just keep a copy of my some public domain titles here. I don't know what I'm doing with this. That was for some test, and I don't know why it's there. But, oh, I'm sorry, this is all public domain stuff. That's what it is. But anyway, I've named it more simple than the example I've usually given out, but I know what's what. So if I'm in this Let me see. If I'm in this structure, I know what all this means. Here's the show folder. Here's the actual library folder. Here's the library type sort folder. And here's my shared media folder on my NAS. I recognize my own structure. It doesn't confuse me. But again, if you're just starting out, it may be beneficial to name things in a way that reminds you exactly what is going on. Movie-libraries. And I follow the convention that Matthew Peterson recommended when I first got involved in Plexaholics. With Linux systems, I don't use any uppercase letters or spaces in my folder structure. So my shared media folder is lowercase, no spaces. And if we can back up, this is not Plex related, so computer backup was fine for me. But you see Plex themselves, or at least Synology's implementation of Plex server, they do use uppercase, but they're not putting any spaces in this. So all my examples, let me go back to this test server. All my examples are all lowercase with no spaces. That's why it's movie-libraries and not movie-space libraries. And I don't know what the real danger is by not doing it, but you know, sometimes you just follow advice and you don't have to know why, because it's recommended by somebody smarter than you. So that kind of explains how to set up your folder structure for success with a small server that's going to grow. I've shown you why it might be beneficial to point to the individual libraries multiple times. Well, not multiple times, but to point to each of these individual instead of pointing to the sort folder. Because if you take a library structure out of a main library later, you can't really do it without removing the path here, adding the path you want, while not adding the path that you want to remove. So, long story short, I firmly believe in this structure. Phil, this may help you. You may want to rearrange your structure for the future, even if you're going to point to the multiple paths right now. If one of those library paths gets too big and you want to break it out into its individual library, you can simply remove that path while not removing the other paths. So hopefully this all makes sense, and happy Saturday and happy Plexing.